Students could practice communicating in situations where they may be talking to someone outside their field. So that's kind of the purpose of it. Thus, the challenge is presenting very complex terms clearly to a very broad audience. So, do I need to read this again? No. Okay, so the three, okay, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. We'll just go on to the rules now. All right, so here's the competition rules organized by the University of Queensland and the 3MT competition. A single static PowerPoint slide is permitted, so there's no slide transitions, animations, or movement or any description. The slide is to be presented from the beginning of the oration. No additional electronic media are permitted. No additional props are permitted. Presentations are limited to 3 minutes maximum, and competitors exceeding 3 minutes are disqualified. Presentations are to be spoken word. They are to commence from the stage, or for live. They were recorded for our session here today. They're considered to have commenced when presenters start the presentation through movement or speech. Yes, thanks, Bruce. And the decision of the adjudicating panel is fine. The adjudicating panel is final. So we are required to go through those rules. And here's the judging criteria, which we are also required to go through. So these are the things that we looked at when we looked at the videos that were submitted. Did the presentation provide an understanding of the background and significance to the research question being addressed while explaining terminology and avoiding jargon? Did the presentation clearly describe the impact and/or the results of the research, including conclusions and outcomes? Did the presentation follow a clear and logical sequence? Was the thesis topic, research significance, results, impact, and outcomes communicated in language appropriate to a non-specialist audience? Did the presenter spend adequate time on each element of the presentation, or did they elaborate for too long on one aspect, or was the presentation rushed? And there's more. We're evaluating on engagement and communication. Did the oration make the audience want to know more? Was the presenter careful not to minimize or understate their research? Did the presenter convey enthusiasm for their research? Did the presenter capture and maintain their audience's attention? Did the speaker have sufficient stage presence, eye contact, and vocal range, maintain a steady pace, and have a confident stance? Did the PowerPoint slide enhance the presentation? Was it clear, legible, and concise? And there's more. We're giving out prizes. The winner receives $500. Honorable mention, there's 2 of them. Well, each will receive $250. So I think now it's time to turn the session over to Jen, who will introduce the 6 presenters competing in our panel session. Yeah, sorry. Here's our moderators. So the organizers, that's us. We are also the judging panel and the moderators, and that's who we are. There we are. All right.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen.
Wonderful. So I get the honor of introducing 6 of our participants today. Thank you so much for being here. And it was an honor to listen to your presentations. And please correct my pronunciation of your names if I get it wrong. I wasn't able to ask you in advance. So Yingli Ding from Oklahoma State University. Yingli, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Great. Polly Kang, who is in another session right now, but she'll be joining us shortly. Mark Mertes, did I pronounce that correctly, Mark?
That's completely fine. Thank you.
Great. From Dortmund University in Germany. We have Kelly Nault. Kelly, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yep, perfect.
Great. From INSEAD. Sam Skowronek. How'd I do, Sam?
Not bad. Skowronek.
Skowronek, okay, almost. Sam Skowronek from the Wharton School. And Teodora Tomova Shakur.
Yay, perfect.
Ooh, okay. New York University. Welcome all, and thank you so much for submitting your 3-minute thesis. So we're going to move now to your presentation. So you've already pre-recorded them, and we're going to play them for the audience to listen to. And then after that, we will announce the winners. So first up is Ying Li.
Hi everyone, my name is Ying Li Deng. I'm a fifth-year PhD student from Oklahoma State University. Today, I'm very glad to present our work about diversity in teams. In this paper, we showed how social category similarities like gender and race interacts with work style differences to affect information exchange, thus affects team performance. This paper is interesting because we reconcile the two conflicting perspectives. One is social categorization perspective, which suggests that similarity is a good thing for team functions because people from the same social category would have less relational concerns, which helps teams work more quickly and efficiently. However, the value in diversity perspective suggests that teams with members that vary in their social categories bring unique perspectives, information, skills, and networks to the table. We focus on how differences in work styles may breach expectations when working with socially similar others, but not when working with socially dissimilar others. In other words, this suggests that when you work with socially similar others, you would expect that they will share the similar work styles as you. However, during the interactions, when you find out that their work styles are different from you, your expectations about their work styles are not met. Therefore, your relationship suffers and you will be less likely to exchange the information with them. We found support for our hypothesis in two studies. The first study is a lab study where we manipulated social category similarities by assigning participants to work either with another student who has same major as them or different major from them. In study 2, we collected data from audit firms and we looked gender similarity and gender dissimilarity as our key measure. In summary, our approach focuses attention on the relational processes and mechanisms that may disrupt group functioning within socially similar dyads rather than those socially dissimilar dyads. I think our study is very interesting and I hope you enjoy listening to it. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you.
Great. So I just want to mention that we will have some time at the end for some question and answer. So if you have questions, hold it for the end of the presentations. Thanks. So next up,
Hi everyone.
Excuse me. Next up, we have Polly Kang.
Hello, my name is Polly Kang. Today I'm presenting my work, Emotional Deception and Negotiations. Emotional deception can profoundly influence interpersonal outcomes, especially in negotiations, which are characterized by information asymmetries. Prior work has shown that expressing anger in negotiations can increase concessions, so it can be tempting to want to exaggerate the anger that you feel or pretend to be angry when you're not. But this can only work when your counterpart doesn't know that you're lying. In fact, if your counterpart finds out that you are lying about your emotions, then it can really fundamentally harm interpersonal perceptions. Most of this existing work has focused on non-emotional deception, such as lies about material facts, reservation prices, and interests. We know very little about detected emotional deception. We do know that people view emotional deception as more ethical than non-emotional deception, but this literature has studied emotional deception very, very broadly. They did not distinguish between lies about different discrete emotions, nor the directionality of the lie. In our work, we contribute to the deception literature, and in particular, the emotional deception literature. First, we introduce a unifying framework to characterize deceptive actions across key dimensions that can account for how these differences influence interpersonal perceptions. We call this the deception perception model. The deception perception model has 4 dimensions: deception magnitude, deception intentions, consequences of deception, and contextual norms of deception. As an example, people may view lies of omission as more ethical than lies of commission because they view lies of omission to be lower in deception intention. Across 4 studies, we investigate perceptions of emotional deception to test our novel unifying framework, the deception perception model. Second, we introduce an important distinction that prior work has overlooked: the directionality of misrepresented emotion. Specifically, we distinguish the up display of emotions, the inauthentic expression of emotions, from the down display of emotions, or the suppression of felt emotions. We also examine 2 discrete emotions, anger and happiness. We find that for both anger and happiness, observers judge down displays to be more ethical and more honest than up displays. And in particular, observers judge down displays of anger compared to up displays of anger to be lower in deception magnitude, less intentional, and less harmful. Third, we also make a methodological contribution. We are the first to study emotional deception in the lab with real negotiations between participants without any confederates. Thank you.
Next is Mark.
Terrorism and the suffering it causes are some of the most pressing issues of our time. We've all heard about hostage takings in which terrorists abduct people and threaten to kill them unless the authorities agree to meet their demands. Authorities facing such demands have to make a difficult decision. Should or shouldn't they concede? Making concessions could provoke future terrorist attacks, but it could also be the only way to save the hostages' lives. Oftentimes, authorities refuse to concede because they do not trust terrorists to hold up their end of the bargain, which raises an important question. Are concessions a reliable means of resolving hostage situations peacefully? It is important to understand that terrorist hostage takings are rarely standalone events. Rather, they are single incidents within longer ongoing campaigns. And we can assume that terrorists do not only want this incident to go well, but also the campaign to go on. Betraying the authorities could hurt the campaign in the long run, because it would diminish the terrorists' chances of receiving concessions ever again, and it could also provoke military action against them. Now, releasing the hostages, on the other hand, could help the campaign, because it helps the terrorists build a reputation as reliable negotiators, and as a result, authorities might be less reluctant to concede in the future. Thus, we predicted that making concessions would lead terrorists to release the hostages safely. And to test this prediction, we analyzed archival data on 23 years worth of international terrorist hostage takings. We looked at terrorist demands, authority concessions, and casualties among the hostages and in general, and we found what we call the concession effect. Even partially fulfilling terrorist demands reduces casualties significantly. Now, given how much is at stake in terrorist hostage takings, we feel that this needed a replication, and this is exactly what we did. This time around, we looked at 48 years of domestic terrorist hostage takings from a different data set, and we found that the concession effect is a stable phenomenon in both types of terrorist hostage takings. The higher the degree of demand fulfillment, the higher the likelihood of a safe hostage release, and the fewer people die. These studies contribute to our understanding of terrorist behavior, but more importantly, they help authorities make evidence-based informed decisions. Now, do we propose that authorities should concede to terrorists under any given circumstances? No, absolutely not. But they should at least consider the possibility. Because especially when the costs of fulfilling terrorist demands are comparatively low and other options such as rescue missions are unavailable, making concessions can be a viable strategy to save the hostages' lives. Thank you.
Great. Next up is Kelly.
As Ralph Waldo Emerson famously said, If I cannot brag of knowing something, then I brag of not knowing it. At any rate, brag. And in the professional world, alerting the people around us to our capabilities and achievements is vital to attaining valued outcomes, such as positions, promotions, status, and power. Yet the methods we use to promote ourselves and our accomplishments often do more harm than good. Bragging, for example, causes people to view us as annoying and insincere, and can make others feel jealous and inferior. But must this always be the case? Can we self-promote in a way that, instead of harming others, actually helps ourselves and those around us? By taking into consideration the particular successes we share, as well as to whom we disclose such information, I believe that we can. Across a series of experimental studies involving hypothetical scenarios and recalled experiences, I examined how bragging can be done in a way that leads others to view braggarts more positively, and actually inspires and motivates these observers. And what I find is that the pre-existing relationship between the braggart and the observer is crucial to how observers perceive such self-promoting behavior. Specifically, when peers boast, that is to say, when colleagues that are of the same rank as us brag, they are viewed as hubristic and threatening, lowering the motivation we have to achieve our own personal goals. Braggarts in supervisory roles, however, are able to inspire their subordinates by sharing news of their accomplishments. This is because subordinates take their superiors' accomplishments as proof that they too can achieve similar outcomes. In addition, I find that superior braggarts who share achievements that are highly relevant to their subordinates elicit the best responses from these observers. Together, this suggests that self-promotion can be used not only to help ourselves accrue status and opportunity at work, but also to inspire those around us. So what's next? I'm continuing this line of work by investigating how the way we describe our accomplishments can help us build professional ties. Specifically, I'm focusing on how describing one's journey to success can promote social connection. I'm also examining when promoting our own good character can lead others to do good too. Taken together, I hope to find the sweet spot of self-promotion, in which we help not only ourselves, but also those around us excel. Thank you.
Great. Next up is Sam.
In 2015, Volkswagen was caught installing defeat devices in their cars to pass emission standards. In 2016, Wells Fargo was caught falsifying bank records. Now, internet companies have been caught funding a campaign to eliminate rules protecting net neutrality. When and why do people choose to deceive? Economists, psychologists, and organizational scholars have asked this question for a long time. They want to mitigate corruption in governments and organizations. We keep asking because we need to come up with better answers. Deception is hidden from view, at least until it hits the news. So we mostly study deception in the laboratory. In the lab, we measure deception by allowing people to self-report outcomes for cash. For example, we often give people a coin to flip and incentivize deception by paying them each time they self-report flipping heads. In my doctoral work, I identify this as lying behavior. The deception lies in misreporting an outcome. But there are other kinds of deception that do not rely on over-reporting, and these seem no less important. This leads me to draw a distinction between lying and cheating, where cheating involves the corruption of the task itself. Cheating is fundamentally different from lying. One is a false report, the other is a fraudulent activity. Liars deceive only after they complete the task. Cheaters deceive while engaging in the task. Cheaters alter processes to achieve their desired outcome. Liars simply report the outcome they desire. I use experiments to compare people's cheating and lying behavior, and I've come away with 3 important insights about deception. 1, cheaters and liars are fundamentally different people. If given the opportunity to both cheat and lie, but 20% of people cheat, 20% of people lie, and only 3% do both. In fact, I found that while men cheat more than women, women directionally lie more than men. 2, cheaters cheat more than liars lie. On average, cheaters commit about 3 times the amount of fraud as liars. 3, cheaters are more consistently deceptive. In a multi-round task, 90% of cheaters in the first round cheat in the next round, while only 40% of liars in the first round lie in the next round. Why should we care about these differences? Well, the corruption scandals we read about are all examples of cheating behavior. But right now, the mitigation strategies adopted by organizations and governments to prevent the next scandal are based exclusively on experiments that measure lying. We're not studying the right problem. Disentangling cheating from lying and showing how they differ are, I think, necessary first steps in the formation of more effective countermeasures.
Thank you. Next up is Theodora.
Hi everyone, my name is Theodora Tumova-Shakur. I'm a PhD candidate at New York University, and I'm extremely excited to talk to you about referral-based hiring, or the process in which incumbent employees submit a recommendation on behalf of a network tie, vouching for that tie to be hired in the organization. Scholarship on referral-based hiring often points at the benefits that referrals bring for organizations, such as increased performance, socialization, and adaptation. Empirical evidence suggests that referred employees bring about 20% more profit to organizations than non-referred employees. Yet, little is known about whether employees who are not involved in the hiring process perceive their referred colleagues as competent. Understanding third parties' perceptions and reactions is crucial, given that a lot of the performance and socialization benefits associated with referrals are dependent upon organizational insiders' proclivity to assist newcomers in learning the ropes of organizational norms, expectations, and duties. We theorize that employees will have negative predispositions towards colleagues hired through referrals and will perceive them as less merited than non-referred colleagues, because such employees mobilize their social network to receive an endorsement instead of solely relying on their competence to land the job. Across one field quasi-experiment, sampling a unique population of individuals who were born and raised in an Eastern European country where referral-based hiring is normative, and another experiment sampling employees working in the construction, manufacturing, and hospitality industries, where referrals make for about half of all hiring decisions, we find that employees perceive referred colleagues as less merited than non-referred employees. And we also find that such low perceptions of merit led individuals to subsequently lower their engagement in behaviors that could benefit such colleagues. Namely, they refuse to help and cooperate with them. As such, we find that even in countries and industries that support referrals, referral-based hiring leads to an important unintended consequence in which employees refuse to create a cohesive work environment for referral beneficiaries and are likely to ostracize them by not helping and cooperating with them. With this work, we make several key contributions. First, this work underscores the mismatch between what organizations aim to achieve and what they actually achieve. Organizations believe that they create a more cohesive work environment by implementing referrals, given that referrals are believed to improve socialization processes, but in fact, they're creating a ridge between colleagues. Second, although ample evidence suggests that referral beneficiaries outperform non-referred employees, we find evidence that there is a mismatch between actual merits and perceived merits of referral beneficiaries. Such mismatch can lead to the creation of an intra-organizational conflict between employees uninvolved in the hiring process and their newly hired referred colleagues. Thank you so much for the attention.
Wonderful. So I'm going to, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much to the presenters. Well done. It's amazing how much you communicate and describe in just 3 minutes. So that was really amazing. I'm now going to turn it over to Laura and Ming to start the Q&A.
All right, thanks so much, Jen. And I couldn't agree more. Deb and I were chatting in the chat saying, you know, how amazing to be able to present in 3 minutes. I certainly couldn't do that. So props and kudos to all of you for doing so. I'd like to start with a general question for the entire group. And I know Polly's joining us from another session, so we'll save her for last. But in random order, decided before we started the session if we could go Theodora, Mark, Kelly, Sam, Yingli, and then hopefully by that time, Polly will be able to join us. So the general question, and I'm going to read these, so I'm very careful to say them as we discussed, if you could tell us about your process, and I'll leave it open if you want to take us in a few different directions, but how did you effectively distill your thesis down to only 3 minutes? And how did you make it a 3 minutes that would appeal to us as a general audience? Another way you could think of this question is, what advice would you give to someone who wanted to create a 3-minute thesis recording?
I think I go first, right? Great. Well, it was a long process, to be honest. The way I approached it is, first I asked myself, what is the takeaway that I want to convey to everybody? And for me, that was that referrals have unintended consequences. And the way I distilled my thesis into just that one sentence is, I remember one of my undergraduate professors was saying that people cannot remember more than 5 to 7 word sentences at once. So I was like, okay, I'm going to stick to 5 words and try to distill my thesis into 5 words. After I did that, I sort of backtracked a little bit, and I started thinking about what is the core tension that I'm trying to resolve. And in my case was that referrals are very prevalent. Many organizations support them because they lead to a variety of benefits for organizations and individuals. And scholarship often focuses on exploring referrals and their benefits. But what we don't know is how referrals actually affect third-party employees at work. So this is the core tension and the core research question that I'm trying to answer. How do third parties react to referral beneficiaries? And from there, I sort of went to the back end and tried to distill my methods within 1 to 2 sentences. I have 4 studies in this paper, so I chose the ones that are the most simple and the more easy to communicate. And that was pretty much the process. Step by step, first I asked, what is the key takeaway? Then why should we care? And then answer the question, how do I fix it? Or how does my approach answer why should we care? And then I practice. It took me about maybe 3 days to perfect it and to get it to 3 minutes. At first I started at a 6-minute long presentation. And then I freaked out a little bit because I was like, oh no, I'm saying everything I want to say. How do I cut it? What do I cut? But as you practice, you start realizing that there are spots that could be cut, spots that need improvement. So within this 3-day process, I was able to distill it within 3 minutes. And the last thing that I did, and that is probably my most important, I guess, advice to others, and that is to run your presentation by other people. And I think there's generally in our profession, we need to build a community of support, and just helping each other is pretty much the most important thing, the main thing that we have going on for us. So I think it's very important to ask others for feedback, ask for help when you need it. So I did that. I shared my slides with my cohort mates. I got their feedback, and I successfully made it into the session.
Okay, Mark,
I hope that was helpful.
That's perfect. Yeah, no, I think that's great advice for all of us. Mark and then Kelly.
Thank you. Yeah, then let me go on. So the main problem that I had writing the script was that my dissertation is a topic that I can talk about for hours if I have to. That's because I know a lot of details about what I researched. So the key problem was to figure out which details to leave in and which details to cut out. You certainly do not want to cut out all the details because you just want it to still be scientific in the way it is presented. It is a 3-minute thesis after all. But I figured that there's a lot of information that nobody really needs. For example, in a 3-minute presentation, nobody wants to know which statistical analysis you did. Nobody wants to know which questionnaires you used, if that wasn't a particularly important part about your research. Nobody wants to see the raw numbers. For example, the nature of your sample is far more interesting than your sample size, because if you present your sample size, then all people can think about is, well, is that enough statistical power or something? You don't want to distract. And I probably wrote a draft in about an hour, where I was sufficiently satisfied with the degree of detail. And then I tried to take enough time for all the parts. And in my presentation, the actual studies are the shortest part of the entire presentation, because I felt like a 3-minute thesis is more about the research question and the sentiment and what the thesis actually contributed to the field. So in the end, I landed at an approach where I imagined talking to someone at a party that I just met, and maybe they're a researcher as well, but I imagined talking to someone at a party, and I wanted to tell them in 3 minutes what my research is about and why I'm excited about my research and that I'm serious about my work. And after figuring that out, it took maybe another half an hour to complete the script, infinitely more time to memorize it, and then about 1,000 takes to record it, because I'm not a native speaker and I had a really hard time doing this.
Fantastic. I can never get people to listen to me for 3 minutes at a party, so I respect that.
That's not great. Okay.
Kelly.
Yeah, so this was quite the challenge for me. I was completely new to the 3-minute thesis format and competition. And so I did, I guess, what all good millennials do. And I went on YouTube and I watched a lot of videos and I tried to figure out which ones impacted me the most and what did I find most interesting and how are those people shaping their presentations. And so what I realized was that the ones that I found most interesting were the ones that the person was really clear about the impact that the research had on the world. And like, what is one clear consequence that we can see and that some people can like respond to? So that's the place where I started from. So that also took some thinking and some soul searching, I guess, to be like, what is my research about? And what am I actually doing in this thesis? And how do my projects come together? And so that was a great way to distill my thinking and kind of come with a clear conclusion and reason of why I'm doing this work. And then from there, I wanted to have the right balance of this kind of like abstract, broad conclusion, as well as some concrete details that people could pick up on and understand exactly how I'm doing this research. And so finding that balance was a bit tricky. So I kind of focused on one project in particular and then tried to mention a couple others that were in the same vein. And then from there, I think as people have said, it's just a lot of practice. The recording part was also a learning process, getting the light right in the background and the speaking tone and all of that. So it definitely took a couple trials, but it was a great experience and really helped me with my own thinking and kind of figuring out as I'm moving forward what I'm interested in, what I'm researching, and how to communicate that to people.
I know I'm still working on the lighting and it's been a year now, so exactly. Sam.
Yeah, so I think what I spent the most time thinking about was, the organizational corruption is readily an issue that everyone agrees is worth studying. And I had to take that idea and bring people from this societal problem to where the literature is quite quickly and define cheating and lying and how we've been studying one and not the other. And I spent a lot of time sort of synthesizing how to get that those definitions clear, but also not ramble on the definitions that only academics might care about. Regarding the process, yeah, the logistics of finding a wall and finding a camera were a lot harder than I think they maybe should have been. I think I stood on the wrong side of the wall where the picture should have been. I'm not a video editor. So those logistic things took hours. I don't know if that's helpful in recommendation. I don't know if that's helpful in recommending how to proceed, but certainly it was helpful in learning how to, for myself, how to create a watchable video. Yeah.
It's kind of amazing how so many of you are saying about the logistics taking almost as long as the content and the substance. That's a really interesting, important lesson, I think, for all of us. All right, Yingling.
Okay, so for me, when I prepared for my presentation, I was trying to tell an interesting story. So for my study, I started with introducing two conflicting perspectives of diversity, and then I presented how our study reconciles those two conflicting perspectives. I think it is really important to attract audience in the first 10 or 20 seconds by using some examples to help them shed light on why what I'm doing is so interesting and vital. And another thing I did was trying to provide some key takeaways. Summarize a whole paper into a 3 minutes presentation can be very difficult and challenging. And in my paper, I have two models with one mediator and two moderators and two very different studies. I know I could not describe them in detail. Therefore, I tried to summarize the results in 2 sentences. I think the form itself may make you have to focus on big picture. So you can't get into the specific details as you do in a 50 pages paper. So it really forces you to narrow into focus on what you want the general audience to observe. But overall, it's a very great experience.
All right, thank you. Yes, and we can clearly see the work that all of you put into really highlighting the impacts and the implications of your studies. So thank you very much for that. So while we're waiting, we'll come back to Polly when she's able to join us for the general question, but we have some specific questions for each of you. And in this one, we'll just go alphabetical order just for ease of answering. So sorry, Yingli, we'll call on you first, so you'll get to speak again. And again, I'll read this so that I'm careful to state the question exactly as the team had crafted it. So your major argument is that similarity creates expectations of having similar work styles, and therefore when people with the same major or gender tend to experience more negative feelings when they experience differences in their work styles. Could you please elaborate a bit further on your predictors and outcome variables in your findings?
Sure. So I have 2 studies. The first study is a lab study that I manipulated social category similarity by randomly assigning participants to either a socially similar dyad, so the 2 students share the same major, or the socially dissimilar dyad. And then they engaged in a decision-making task, and they need to thoroughly discuss with each other and exchange information in order to get the correct answer. So that's how I measured dyadic information exchange. After the decision task, they answered questions about 5 items in order to measure the dyadic work style differences. The one sample item is we share similar work ethics. So all the 5 items were reverse coded and aggregated to the dyad level using the mean levels across 2 participants. So this is the first study. And the second study, we collected data from a few field setting. And participants needed to rate each team members in a round robin format. So in a group of 3, A rated B and C, B rated A and C rated A and B. In this study, the social category similarity was measured by the gender of the dyad. So whether it is a same gender dyad or a different gender dyad. And the work style differences were measured using the same items as in study 1, but we measured work style differences at the beginning of the audit project and also at the end of the audit project. And we also measured dyadic information exchange using 3 items. What is interesting about study 2 is that we also show dyadic information exchange has effect on team performance through team information exchange. So we measured team information exchange using similar items as dyadic information exchange, except that we changed the reference from a specific coworker to the team as a whole. And team performance was measured using a ratio of budgeted hour over actual hour. Because we collected data from the audit firms. So it is a well-established and popular measure to examine whether the team is efficient during their audit projects. I hope I answered your question.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thanks.
Let's move to Mark then next. So Mark, you found that when people make concessions to terrorists, they're more likely to release the hostages. Are there any boundary conditions, or I should say, what boundary conditions do you see of the associations between concession making and releasing hostages?
Thank you for this question. This is actually really interesting because we did a second study complementing the first one, showing exactly two factors that can be excluded as boundary conditions. That is time and internationality. The first study, we looked at international terrorist hostage takings exclusively. And well, we found the effect, but it is estimated that domestic terrorist hostage takings occur about 8 times more frequently. So we had this huge majority of cases that our study couldn't speak to. So in the second study, we found that the effect shows in both types of hostage takings, and that it is, well, timely stable, you could say. It works just as well today as it did in the 70s, which is great. There are certainly candidates for boundary conditions to our effect. One possible candidate would be ideological motivation. Not all terrorists share the same goals. For example, we differentiate between left-wing terrorists who want to achieve a certain goal in the form of political change, ethno-nationalists who want to, well, bring sovereignty to a certain strip of land, and then there's right-wing terrorists who act from racism or fundamentalism or cultism. And these types of terrorists, they differ, for example, in the degree of violence with which their encounters play out. So it could be that ideological motivation could be a moderator to the concession effect, as we found and described it. Another potential candidate would be civilian support. Bigger terrorist groups, they experience support by people in their country, and a lot of support means that they have a lot of resources. So it could potentially be that terrorists who have a lot of support, they do not need to resort to hostage takings because they are not dependent on the resources that their demands could bring in. On the other hand, it is possible that groups with a lot of support are more consistent in their exchange behavior and are more reliable in their exchange behavior, and that they release the hostages because their supporters would probably not condone the level of violence that, not adhering to the promises and killing the hostages would infer. There's other examples. For example, cultural tightness and looseness. We used a theoretical framework based on social exchange theory, which is all about exchange and adherence to norms such as the norm of reciprocity. And cultural tightness and looseness is all about how much emphasis a culture places on adhering to norms and how bad it is to violate these norms. And it could be that terrorists from a tighter culture have a higher tendency to keep their promises and let the hostages go. That is completely possible. The problem with all that is we do not know whether these are boundary conditions because of a lack of data that we have. Even though we used huge databases, 190 megabytes of Excel file, about 190,000 cases, when it comes down to all the missing data and all that, we had to analyze a few hundred maybe, and that could be problematic for meaningful statistical analysis of moderation. And unless there's better and more data on terrorist events, I think we're not going to see deeper investigations into the boundary conditions anytime soon.
One of those situations where you sort of hope there isn't enough data to analyze in that case.
You certainly do, yes. Yes, exactly.
Thanks very much, Mark. That's helpful.
Thank you too.
Kelly, You identified instances in which self-promotion behaviors create positive impressions. Do you think that it's possible for people to promote themselves positively in a conflict situation? And if so, could you indicate for us, please, a few of those circumstances?
Sure. Yeah. So I do think this is possible. I think people can promote themselves positively. However, I would expect that the topic that the individual chooses to brag about to be absolutely vital to creating these positive outcomes. So for example, within such a situation, if one party brags about how in the past their counterparts were particularly satisfied with a joint interaction, and that they remain friends with these counterparts, they can inspire the other party to strive to reach a compromise as well, because the bragger communicates information on how the complex situation could be resolved. And so they're kind of letting their counterpart know, I've done this in the past, I was really good at this in the past. And there's also a kind of a pro-social nature in that scenario about like, we could both turn out well in this situation. However, the bragger definitely must be able to tap into an experience that will be relevant to the observer. That's what we've learned from our studies. And so if the observer has no interest in compromise or the context in which the bragger has succeeded in the past, it's unlikely that the bragger will have much effect on the observer, so neither negative nor positive. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
I'll keep that in mind next time I have a fight with my partner. Don't brag about the wrong thing in front of him. It's good advice. Wonderful. Sam, if we could turn to you next. So you proposed a differentiation between cheating and lying. I wonder if and how you can differentiate between these behaviors in a negotiation or a conflict situation. If you can differentiate between them, could you describe some of the features of cheating versus lying in a negotiation or a conflict?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So cheating occurs before you before you fraudulently report the information. So cheating is either before you lie. So in a negotiation context, if you're asked to produce documents and you want to overclaim the success of your company, you would fraudulently create those documents to cheat. Now, often negotiations are dynamic situations. You're asked questions that you haven't prepared for. In those situations, you can usually only lie, because if you were to cheat on them, you'd have to go back in time. But cheating can also occur after the fact, and you see this in high-profile scandals where you lie and then you cheat. You recreate the evidence to cover up the lie you just told. So you can see cheating both before or after this negotiation. During the negotiation itself, you're more likely to see lying once you're off script.
Thanks, that's helpful. I guess I never really thought about all the opportunities to cheat before and after. I'll have to reconsider. Theodora, let's go to your project next. So your research discusses the negative effect of referred versus non-referred employees on perceptions of merit. How does your research relate to conflict management in organizations? Can you give us a few specific examples?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This is a very important question. From the equity literature, we know that people care about an adequate input to output equity ratio. So for instance, if I put a little effort into a task and get a really big reward, I would feel uncomfortable, and next time I'll put more effort. And similarly, if I put a lot of effort into a task and get little rewards, then next time I'll probably consider not putting so much effort into it. And same goes for other people. When you see that somebody has low input, such as low merit, and they receive a really big reward, such as employment, organizational insiders will naturally have a good reaction that this is a justice violation occurrence. And as such, the most natural thing to do is to try to balance this equity ratio, because it's very hard to prune others' inputs, and the most easy way to balance the equity ratio is to actually affect referred employees' outputs. Organizational insiders may naturally engage in behaviors that will ensure that this referred candidate will not receive yet another highly desired output, such as a future promotion, bonus, or good task allocation. And the easiest way to do this is to simply not help them, to engage in behaviors that are not beneficial to this employee. And now imagine, let's say, you ask a colleague in your department about a data analysis question or a department-specific question, and they just write you off and don't answer. That would be so frustrating. So this is pretty much, but referrals create a potential for conflict between employees. They drive a ridge between employees. And this is how I see referrals to create conflict at work. And what is even more interesting is that these types of behaviors, behaviors that are not other benefiting, such as refusing to help and refusing to cooperate, they're very hard to catch. So managers could potentially catch harming behaviors, such as acting antisocially, backstabbing colleagues, or denigrating their reputation, but it's really hard to catch when somebody refuses to help or to cooperate. And as such, I argue that referrals are in fact creating long-lasting damaging effects and create conflict that is really hard to catch and fix on time. I hope this helps and answers the question.
No, that's very helpful. And I would definitely refer all of my colleagues as helpful when I have any questions to ask them. So Polly has perfect timing and has just arrived. So we'll ask her 2 questions in a row to give her an opportunity to answer some of the same that the other presenters have also had a chance to answer. So Polly, welcome. So glad that you could join us from your other session. Let's just start with a general question first. So we're really glad that you could come. If you could just, we've seen your video, and I'm sure you've seen it many times as well. But if you could just tell us about your process, and you can take it any kind of direction that you find useful. How did you effectively distill your thesis down to only 3 minutes? How did you make it a 3 minutes that would appeal to us as a general audience? And then maybe another way to think of the question is, what advice would you give to someone who wanted to create a 3-minute thesis recording of their own?
Oh, okay, thanks. So when I first started to film the 3-minute thesis video, I didn't really fully grasp how short 3 minutes was. And I actually didn't know that the 3-minute thesis competition was a common thing either, because I had never seen it before. So initially I really was flabbergasted because 3 minutes is a short amount of time. And I did email like Laura too for a couple like follow-up questions. And then she was like, hey, this isn't a new concept. You could Google it and then like see that other people have done it before too. So that was really helpful, by the way. So I did that. I went and I listened to a bunch of other 3-minute theses. And then for my particular project, I really just thought hard about what parts of the paper make it novel and important. And in my case, the contribution that we make to the theory by introducing a unifying framework of deception perception was the most important thing. And because the existing work has been comparing 2 different types in silos, and it's really just important to have like a parsimonious account. The second thing I wanted to highlight was our methodological contribution, because we're the first to manipulate emotional deception in a lab setting in a real negotiation context with no confederates. But I, again, only have 3 minutes. So then when you think about what's most important, in 3 minutes, there was only enough time to talk about the first and foremost, most important thing. So that's basically all I did.
No, that's helpful. And that resonates with a lot of what the other presenters have said as well. I think probably all the faculty here on this call would be hard pressed to say anything in only 3 minutes. So we very much respect all of these submitters for that. So we had a question specific to your project itself, Polly. You discussed emotion deception and negotiation and used anger as an example, which is one of the ideas near and dear to my heart as an emotions researcher myself. So we were curious, do people mostly and strategically display their anger to another party, or can they also strategically display other emotions such as guilt or disappointment? And do you have any ideas on how your theoretical framework could apply more broadly to other kinds of emotions?
That's an excellent question. I definitely agree that people can strategically display other types of emotions as well. And in our paper, we do also look at happiness, but of course there was only, 3 minutes, so that got cut. So we do find that happiness is fundamentally different from anger. So for happiness, people view the high authentic display of happiness to be more ethical than low authentic display, and also more ethical than down displays. And people view down display of happiness as less ethical, less honest, higher in deception magnitude, higher in deception intention, and also more harmful compared to the authentic display of happiness. And this is completely different from what we saw with anger. So I completely agree with you that it's really important to look at different types of discrete emotions separately, because it could have a completely different effect. And another thing that's important is part of our framework, we highlight the contextual norms of deception as well. So depending on the norms and depending on who the observer is or who the target is, the way that people view the same action could also be different, even for the same situation. So for instance, like maybe I, grew up expressing a lot of anger, or like around people who express anger really honestly, then it might be really normative for someone like me to see people act angry when they are. But if I'm not used to that, then it could seem very, very rude and abrasive. So it just depends on the contextual norms as well.
So what you're saying is we have to pay attention to what all of our colleagues strategically express to their students, so that we know we're strategically expressing the right emotion to deceive our students who we're teaching.
Right.
Okay, thanks very much, Polly. That was helpful, and again, good timing. So happy you're able to join us.
Thank you.
I want to open it up if we have any audience questions. You've listened to us talk a lot, but if you have any questions, feel free to raise a virtual or real hand, or throw a question in the chat. Bruce Berry.
Let me unmute here. Yes. I wanted to ask Kelly a question. Hi, Kelly. Very interesting stuff. Here's my question, and it's kind of tangential to what you're really doing, which is the psychology of self-promotion. So it's really a question about the semantics of what you're doing. It struck me during your talk that you seem to be using the words bragging and self-promotion synonymously. And it occurred to me that they are not synonymous. And actually, during the next talk, I went to the dictionary and verified that. Bragging is pompous, boastful, cockiness, arrogance. Self-promotion is kind of a functional enterprise that tries to advance one's own situation, growth, prosperity, whatever. So I'm curious to hear from you. The question is, what is your thinking about these two constructs, bragging and self-promotion, that you are treating synonymously? Bragging is terrible. Nobody likes somebody who brags, but self-promotion is what a lot of people are coached to do. So maybe you could talk about what the distinction between those things, which you kind of portrayed as synonymous.
Sure. So I think you pick up on a good point. So going through the literature way back when I was starting this project, there's a very small literature on bragging that actually uses the term bragging, and then a much larger literature on impression management and self-promotion in general. And if you look at definitions of the two behaviors, they're very similar in the academic literature. And so the definition that we cite in the paper is taking credit for one's achievements is bragging behavior. So I think that would also be considered self-promotion behavior. So maybe you want to think of bragging as under the umbrella of self-promotion. Interestingly, so when we sent this paper out for review, the reviewers had the exact same issue, and they said that, oh, you're not actually manipulating bragging behavior, or your definition doesn't fit your the experimental manipulations that you're using. However, so we went back to the data, and we ran a couple extra studies, and so we had these bragging and these no brag manipulations, really just people saying, oh, I got appointed as a new team leader, I sold 6 houses in the past month and my commission's up, things like that. And we had people rate them on how braggy they seemed. So these kind of conditions were much more braggy than like these no brag conditions, which were just, I changed my schedule at work, or I bought a new, a toy for my kid. And they were also significantly above the midpoint of the scale. So even though these kind of seemingly innocuous self-promotion scenarios that we use in our experiments may not seem as like the obnoxious Trump-like bragging that we've gotten used to in the past couple of years, the participants in our studies do see them as bragging. And I think that they fall under that self-promotion guideline. So I think the bragging versus self-promotion dichotomy is more perceptual, and it's more about kind of the bad rap that bragging has. But if you actually look at what's being said, they're much more similar than you may initially think.
One wonders if it's also about how it's delivered. One can imagine that the same claim about one's fabulous achievement could be delivered in such a way that it's interpreted as validly self-promotional, self-advancement behavior versus bragging, which I think clearly is a pejorative. I mean, at least in English, I don't know about others.
Absolutely, yeah. And then just to that point, so we also have run a couple of new mediation studies measuring authentic and hubristic pride. And so we actually find that superior braggarts, who are the ones that promote those positive consequences, are seen as more authentically prideful and less hubristically prideful than the peer braggarts. And so the observers are actually appraising their behavior differently and seeing them as more like having more their outcomes being more controllable and perhaps more due to their skills and experience than the peers who perhaps their outcomes are seen as more uncontrollable and they just got lucky. So I think you're definitely hitting the nail on the head there.
Thank you.
I'll ask a question if that's okay.
Yeah.
So first, thank you all to the presenters. It's all fascinating work, and we could spend all night here. My question is for Mark, and Mark, I thought your research is really interesting, and terrorism is the most severe form, or among the most severe forms of conflict that we can think about, and it is a rare event, at least most of the time, we can hope. And so I'm curious your thoughts about similarities and differences from conclusions you might draw about terrorism and what you've learned from studying terrorism to, let's say, less severe forms of conflict.
Well, my research on terrorism is mostly about the short and long-term effects of concessions to terrorist hostage takers. Most research on the topic itself has investigated factors leading to authorities making concessions. In the research that is referred to authority capitulation. But these studies never asked whether these concessions will actually lead to safe hostage release. So the ground that I'm covering here is quite narrow, I would say, and it's narrowed down to terrorism itself. Because in other forms of conflict, there is, well, I'd say rarely negotiation where we can apply the same assumptions that we need to make the theoretical framework that we use to predict the outcomes work. That is pretty unique to hostage takings, especially terrorist hostage takings. Criminal hostage takings has a complete different background, a completely different subset of assumptions there. So I'm actually not quite sure how to answer that. Could you specify a little more?
I was sort of giving you the floor to think about similarities and differences. It sounds like one thing I hear you saying is that it is critical that we study these interactions in this context because it might be different from other contexts. I know there's, I think, a prominent speaker, I'm forgetting his name, it's a guy that's written a book and that's very popular, sort of who's a FBI terrorist negotiator, and he sort of applies that and does trainings in businesses.
Chris Voss.
Chris Voss, yeah, I think so. And so his view, I guess, would be that you could take some of the findings from the terrorism negotiations and apply it. It sounds like your view is that there's important differences also. So that was what I was curious your thinking on.
To some degree, yes. I think the main message that applies to other kinds of negotiations and conflict is the importance of concessions. Even in the 1960s, Osgood proposed the grid model, which essentially proposed escalating conflict resolutions by making concessions, and then the other side makes concessions and all that. And as I said before, the assumptions for these different kinds of situations, they differ. But I think making concessions and making a first step is important. But then again, here in hostage taking situations, that happens under the gun, literally. So it's really hard to compare these cases.
Can I make a comment on that follow-up? I think it's also interesting, some of the boundary conditions you were talking about earlier in response to a question with, like the more fundamentalists, perhaps like, this is not going to apply. I think it says something about the irrationality of the actor, or whether the actor has something to lose or not, right? Like, so those kinds of hostage taking situations are perhaps not as comparable, but, like what is, right? Like, so situations where, like negotiations where one side is really dependent on the other. I think Mackenzie Reese and Brian Gunia presented a paper on this, ongoing work, right? So when they're really dependent on the other side, right? Like maybe that may force them to do things that, that seem desperate. They're not going to make concessions in the way that you find. It also reminded me, I'm not saying this is a joke, like the first minute of your presentation, I was actually thinking about my negotiations with my 3-year-old. And I think other popular negotiation books have compared, toddler negotiations to hostage negotiations, right? So all about, how irrational the other side is, whether they actually have control over their desires, or like they can formulate a goal, right? So those kinds of hostage negotiations, like real fundamentalists, right, has nothing to lose, or I guess you're not going to find the same effects that you find, and so that could be a potential variable, right? Like, so how dependent is the other side? Like, what do they have to lose? How rationally are they approaching the situation?
Do I have a minute to answer to this? Okay, thank you. Terrorist rationality has been called into question many times before, because a lot of people actually assume we recently collected data on this, that terrorists cannot be trusted, and most people would say that it's because terrorists are riddled with psychological disorders and are therefore unable to behave rationally. From what we know, that is not true. There's a lot of research showing that the prevalence of psychological disorders is far lower among terrorists that are not lone actor terrorists, but rather in a terrorist organization, than among the general populace. Second, we have a lot of research showing that even people who are afflicted by a psychological disorder are able to make rational decisions for themselves. And then there's growing literature on terrorists specifically showing how rational they are when they plan attacks, and how they prepare for those attacks, and how they form alliances and all that. And that is an interesting proposition, because we do not know whether terrorists from different kinds of terrorist organizations, like the fundamentalists or the left-wing terrorists, whether they differ in this regard. We really can't say. What we know is that terrorists in organization that are not lone actor perpetrators, they are selected very specifically for the job that they are doing. There's a book was published in 2003 on the Al-Qaeda and how their inner structure works. And after reading this book, I thought that Al-Qaeda did better personal selection than most companies I ever worked for. About 3 of 100,000 recruits get full membership and get to do the actual jobs. If there's anything wrong with them with regard to impulsive behavior or something like that, they never get to do the jobs. So we can at least assume terrorist rationality in this regard, and this is what allows us to use social exchange theory to predict the outcomes.
Great. Other audience questions? Or panelists to each other as well, feel free.
Could I ask another?
I suppose so, Bruce.
I wanted to ask Sam a question, but I got to remind myself of what the question is. Oh, yes. Sam, so one of the sentence you said that really struck me was when you said cheaters cheat more than liars lie. And what I think you meant was you find that cheaters in time 1 are more likely to cheat at time 2 than liars at time 1 or or like a lie at time 2. My question is, and your answer is going to be, I don't know, I don't have the data, but I want you to just speculate. Why? Why do cheaters cheat more than liars lie?
They cheat. Cheaters cheat more than liars lie because cheaters can generate fraudulent evidence to bring to bear if they're caught, whereas liars are less insulated from the truth. If you find out someone who lied to you, they have no choice but to come out and say, I'm sorry. If detecting cheating is harder because they have evidence to bring to bear. So if you find a way to cheat and you're successful, you can produce a lot of fraud quite quickly. That's why cheaters cheat more than liars lie.
Great. Do you think cheaters know this? I mean, is this a conscious process? It makes sense.
I think the reason why the large scandals of corporate greed are cheating examples, not lying examples, is because that psychological penalty of guilt, and that there's this difference between how far your report is from the truth. Cheaters don't have to deal with any of that because cheaters didn't observe the truth, and they can generate fraudulent evidence to bring to court to say, look, I did it honestly. And unless you find out the process through which they cheated, which is very hard, then they can get away with it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Bruce, you just helped Sam coin a new phrase, insulated from the truth. That is an amazing, some politicians will listen to that when they take it.
Excellent. I would like to live my life insulated from the truth. Thank you.
Wouldn't we all sometimes? Any other, I think we still have a couple more minutes if we'd like. Any other final audience questions?
I have a question for Sam, because I'm curious. So my work has been a lot on moral character and how some people, sort of as a function of their personality, who they are, what they bring, are more unethical across lots of situations. So they cheat, lie, do all kinds of things, and we can predict that by asking them some questions and then seeing how they behave over the course of months later. You are making a strong distinction between saying there's cheaters and there's liars and they're not the same, and knowing one doesn't necessarily know the other, and that I'd say is a direct opposite assumption I would have, sort of coming from my own work. And I'm curious how you would reconcile the two views. One, given what I would see as evidence that there is patterns in people's behavior that we can detect, of course not 100%, but you're making, I think, stronger distinctions that I would make about different kinds of bad behavior, and maybe that there'd be different predictors. So I'm curious you to speculate that, maybe help me kind of think about how you would approach reconciling that.
Yeah, it's a strong claim, and I think there is likely a correlation between the people who would try to cheat and who would try to lie. The reason for that correlation, though, is often the systems that people engage in only allow for one or the other type of behavior. So like, you can't lie on your SATs, you can't cheat in a negotiation, you're sort of forced to do one kind of deception or the other based on the situation that you're given. Cheating sort of has a different profile to it, where to cheat, you have to sort of premeditate how you're going to go about the task. You have to be a little creative in how you do it, think about how you might get caught. Oh, so I would predict that cheating, cheaters and liars, let's take correlation with impulsivity. I would think that cheaters are less impulsive, whereas liars are more impulsive, because they sort of have to protect themselves from truth quickly, so they have a gut reaction to lie, whereas cheaters sort of preempted that situation entirely by cheating. Now, upstream of that is obviously the decision to act unethically. So certainly, I think there are some characteristics that'll correlate with both. In the research, I found only about 3% of people do both. Even when I tell them, hey, you're going to be paid just based on your self-report, people still cheat. So there's this preference for generating fraudulent evidence, and when you can't, then you don't become unethical at all. So it's an interesting question. I started year prior as well. I didn't predict that these would be two different people, but rather two different behaviors under the subset of deception. So I'm still very much exploring it.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it's about that time. So I first want just to sincerely thank all 6 of our presenters today. So if we could just give them a round of applause. That fantastic work. Thank you, Michael, for your little round. I think we've learned so much. I'm actually amazed at how much conversation and learning and thought-provoking questions we've had from literally just 18 minutes of video. So that is amazing. I think is a huge testament to the work that these 6 put in. So Ming and I will now turn it over to Deb, who will take us through the results of our very first ever IACM 3-minute thesis competition. Deb?
It is my great honor to announce the winners. Before I do that, I want to just repeat what Laura said, and that is these were all really impressive. And as you can see, the competition was stiff. The presentations every one of you just did an outstanding job, and it's just been a delight to work on this. And yes, the winners were selected from the videos only. They were already determined before this session. So that's all already done. And thank you for your feedback also, everyone, on ideas for next year and how we can, what we might do differently and how we can improve this. So, drum roll, please. There it is. Got it? Okay, thanks, Jen.
Ready? Can I advance to our next slide?
Let's advance to the next slide. Our honorable mentions go to Polly and to Sam for your great presentations. They each come with an award of $250 each, which you will be getting in the mail. Polly, your face. What? Yes. And our winner is Mark Mertis. And Laura, can you unmute everybody and so we can give a round of applause to everyone?
I don't know if I have such power, but if everyone could unmute.
Everyone unmute.
Congratulations. Tough decisions by the judges.
Well done.
Well done answering the barrage of questions from the panel, everyone. So hopefully the fun of it was outweighed the stress of creating these and answering questions. So thank you.
And Mark, you will receive both a plaque and a prize of $500.
Thank you. That is very generous. I did not know what a modest cash prize is, but that's not modest, it feels like.
Well, we're very happy to sponsor the Conflict Management Division of Academy of Management was the sponsor, and for the 3MT competition, along with IACM, also co-sponsoring so we're pleased to be able to offer that. Yeah. And Jen, I think I'm turning it over to you.
I think we're just going to wrap it up now. We invite anyone to kind of spread the word. Obviously, those in the session currently won't be submitting again, but spread the word to other people about next year, because we're going to hopefully be able to do this in person. And I think we'll follow up with some of the ideas about whether it will be recorded. I think probably not. It sounds like we can do it in person. So that might be the new way to go for next year. That sounds like a lot of fun. Thanks again to our sponsors. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We really enjoyed putting this together.